Islam news. Now, obviously, I'm being facetious when I use that phrase, but I get a bit irritated with people who say, oh, why do you talk about Islam and Muslims? You know what? We should spend the entire show talking about the rate of GST, of HST, taxation. Where is it today? If you're really interested in that, fine. I'm not. If coexistence is the order of the day, if there's lots of hugs and humility, that's fine. When that happens, I will never discuss Islam again. Whilst Christians in the Muslim world are being murdered, while people are having their heads cut off, are having a different point of view from the establishment in the Islamic world, while Muslims in Europe and North America are increasingly trying to impose their will, it's not that I will speak out. I have to speak out. Otherwise, why bother to be in media at all? A Muslim gang beat up a white woman and the judge lets them off. Montreal Muslims declare jihad on a nativity scene. Honour killings. Well, who else to comment? But the great Robert Spencer, author, founder of Jihad Watch, and he joins us now from somewhere in the United States of America. Welcome to you, sir.
Thank you, Michael. Always happy to be here.
And, you know, the reason that we're not specific about where you are is because, well, because you get death threats.
I get death threats on a regular basis, and so whenever I speak, I have guards, and whenever I'm out in public, I try not to give my location. You know, this is a fact of life, but people say, well, aren't you scared of the death threats? Aren't you afraid that you might die? And I say, well, it's not as if I'm not going to die if I stop telling the truth about jihad. And so I'm ready to stand for liberty, and I know there might be a cost, but if people aren't willing to take the risk, then all is lost.
Well said. You're very brave, and you have sometimes suffered for it. We're going to talk about a woman now who suffered, well, for something or other. You'll see a video in the background here. This is in the United Kingdom, and this is a woman who was beaten up by a group of Muslim girls. They called her a white slag while they were beating her up. And now, violence occurs, various people are the perpetrators, but they went to court, they were arrested, these young women, and the judge said, well, they're Muslim and not used to alcohol, and they'd been drinking, they were drunk, thus I think we should give them a second chance. Robert?
It's just more insanity. You know, I have at Jihad Watch an absurd Britannia alert, and this is a very good candidate for that, because it just is another one of a very long series of absurd accommodations and concessions to Islamic supremacists. Now, these are just thugs, these girls. They just beat up this girl. It was a racial incident. They called her a white slag and so on. It really didn't have anything to do with Islam or jihad, and the judge brought that into it. He made this an Islamic issue by saying, well, they're Muslims, they got drunk, they weren't used to it, as if this excuses their behavior. Imagine, however, if the roles had been reversed and a group of white girls had beaten up a Somali Muslim girl. I doubt that the judge would have been that lenient. As a matter of fact, I don't have any doubt whatsoever that the judge would have been very harsh with such a white gang. And so, you know, the double standard here is apparently designed to placate Muslims and make them feel as if they're a part of English society, but it's only going to make Islamic supremacists more aggressive and assertive and violent than they would have been otherwise.
You know, there's a line in Evelyn Waugh's Great Bridesmaid Revisited where one of the heroes, I suppose, of the book, vandalism he commits, and he's a heavy drinker, but in court the defense is he wasn't used to the strong wine. And it's meant to be a joke, it's funny, it's ludicrous. In this case, the same applies. Now, I agree with you, I don't think it was Muslims attacking a non-Muslim, they were attacking a white girl. However, Somali gangs in this country, in Canada, and of course in the UK, have become a major problem. And sometimes the women in particular, are hijab-wearing gang members.
Oh, absolutely, Michael. There's no doubt about that. And of course, it's well known that the Somali Muslims in Minneapolis have become a formidable recruiting ground for jihadis who go back to Somalia to wage jihad against the government that they don't think is Muslim enough and has an instituted Islamic law to the degree that would suit them. And we have now suicide bombers who are American citizens who have gone over to Somalia and blown themselves up. And the question is, why do we keep importing into the U.S. and Canada these Somali Muslim communities, whole communities at once, 300, 400, 500 people, and no attempt whatsoever of any kind is made to try to determine whether these people have jihadist sentiments, whether they're violent, whether they're dangerous, whether they're going to wage jihad on American or Canadian soil. Nobody cares. It would be Islamophobic to ask such questions or to try to make such inquiries.
And of course, some of the primary groups that suffer at the hands of these extremists are other Muslims who do simply want to become part of greater American or Canadian society.
Absolutely. And you know, even worse is a recent item that came out with a couple of Somali Muslim spokesmen in the United States who spoke out against this jihad terror recruitment and against this jihad activity among Somali Muslims in the United States. And they were denounced by the Hamas-linked Muslim Brotherhood front group, the pseudo-moderate Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE. They were denounced. Because here again, CARE shows that it's pro-terror, pro-jihad, anti-American, and has no interest in safeguarding Americans, is not a moderate group at all. They're denouncing these and actually opening to threat these Somali Muslims who dare to stand against terror in their own community.
Mm-hmm. Now, many years ago, I was slightly involved in a campaign in the Middle East, in Israel, in Nazareth, which is an Arab town within Israel with a large Christian population. And of course, Nazareth is very important in Christian history. And there was an attempt by the Muslim community there to build a mosque that was higher than the church, the great church, of course, of Virgin Mary and Jesus. There was no reason to do this. It has no real significance within Islam, but that was the campaign, and we tried to fight against it. Now, in Montreal, there was a nativity scene, and Muslim groups said at Christmas, which has no particular resonance or relevance within Islam, we demand Islamic symbolism. If you're going to have a nativity scene, you have to have Islamic symbolism. And the authorities said, we're not going to do that, so the only thing we can do is to get rid of the nativity scene. It's a different type of jihad, isn't it?
Oh, very much so, but it's all part of the same supremacist agenda. The goal of jihad in Islam is to institute Islamic law over the world. Now, Islamic law does not allow equality of rights for Christians or Jews or any other non-Muslims with the Muslims. As a matter of fact, one of the specific things, since you mentioned Nazareth, is that house of worship for non-Muslims must never be higher than that of a Muslim. And in Nazareth, they were actually going to build that mosque in the courtyard of the church of the famous church in Nazareth. And this was a defiantly supremacist assertion of the alleged superiority of Islam over Christianity. In Montreal, it's the same thing. The population of the town where this nativity scene was disputed, the Muslims constitute no more than 6%. The Christians of various denominations are well over 50%, the overwhelming majority of the community. And so now the Muslims have intimidated this community into denying its fundamentally Christian identity. It's somehow wrong to be able to assert that these are majority Christian communities. This is a Christian a town made up largely of Christians, and so they're going to have a nativity scene in a public space. This is not prejudicial to anybody else. It's not discriminatory. It's simply not representative of the town to put a Muslim symbol with a Christian symbol on an equal footing. But this is, once again, part of this supremacist agenda that always asserts itself.
Stay with us, Robert. When we come back, I want to talk about that moral gargoyle of honor killings and what it really means. Stay with us. The world in Islam, what is going on in Islamic news, the Muslim community. And again, for those people who say, oh, you shouldn't talk about that, I have to talk about that. It's the news. I think a lot of news is contrived. It's not real. It's not actually... You know, the great G.K. Chesterton, wonderful man, a hero of mine, he said that journalism is often telling people Lord Jones is dead, and they didn't even know Lord Jones was alive in the first place. The real issues out there, well, the future of our civilization, tolerance, freedom, coexistence. Robert Spencer, a great author. Hey, Christmas gift, pick up his books for Christmas. Googling Robert Spencer, Jihad Watch, a wonderful website. So let's talk about honor killings. We have a particularly notorious, infamous case in Canada right now. I think it will become quite iconic in the history of this country, where the allegation is that I think 4 people in all were murdered. And their crime, they simply wanted to be ordinary Canadian kids. They weren't being promiscuous or permissive. They were just being ordinary, and they were killed. If this was a one-off, okay, but this is quite common, is it not?
Oh, it's quite common, and it's already happened in Canada before, with Aksa Parvez in Mississauga, Ontario, who was murdered by her father for refusing to wear the Islamic headscarf a few years back. And there have been several other cases in the United States. It's happening in the West with increasing frequency. See, what people don't understand is that this is something that is broadly tolerated within the Islamic culture. It's, in Islamic law, it specifies that there is no penalty, Michael, for a parent who kills his child. And so this is something that is not only tolerated, it's actively encouraged in states like Jordan and Syria, where if you commit a murder that's just a murder, then you go to prison or you're executed. But if you commit a murder and can prove that it was an honor killing, then they actually, by law, there are lesser penalties, and you'll be out of prison in a few years if you go at all. And 91% of honor killings around the world are committed by Muslims. This is something that is very much part of Islamic culture. Not only that, it's even higher in Europe. It's 96%. And a lot of the other ones are crimes of passion, where a non-Muslim husband kills an adulterous wife or a wife that he suspects of adultery, whereas there is no incidence among non-Muslims of parents killing children because they have stained the family honor. This is a uniquely Islamic concept, and it's one that I think you're going to see with increasing frequency in Canada, because here again, nothing is being done to challenge the Islamic community to root out the attitudes and assumptions that lead to this in the first place. Everybody's too politically correct even to acknowledge in the first place that this is an Islamic problem. And so they can't press the Islamic community to conform to Canadian laws and mores.
It's interesting you mentioned Jordan and Syria. I mean, I know Jordan quite well. And that's a country where fundamentalism is quite firmly controlled, and you have a leadership that is British educated. Syria is a country that has been rather secular. So if those two countries have such a problem with honor killings, I can only imagine what other parts of the Islamic world are like. It's fascinating you mentioned the percentages there, 96 and 91%, because the average article in the Western press about honor killings, you barely see the word Islam or Muslim even mentioned.
Oh yeah, Michael, and if you do see it, generally stories about honor killing in Western papers will say that they talked to the local imam, and he said honor killing has nothing to do with Islam. It's a cultural practice that people of all cultures engage in. And this is pure nonsense, and once again it deflects attention away from what must be done. We have to challenge the Islamic community to deal with these issues in the West. And we're not doing it, and instead, the mainstream media is aiding and abetting their denial about the fact that there's a problem at all.
I think I know the reason why, but I want your opinion too. Why is it that people... Look, it's good manners to be courteous and empathetic. When we talk about, for example, crime in the black community, I think we should understand the history of oppression and slavery and so on. I think it's only right. But when it comes to Islam, we don't treat other minorities with such kid gloves. We're not so forgiving of any other group. But if it comes to honor killings or violence or sectarianism, are we physically frightened? Are we emotionally intimidated? Or just so politically liberal that we will not speak the truth?
I think that I'll have to go with all of the above on that one, Michael. People, I think, are physically intimidated. They're physically threatened. There was a funny thing happened with one of my books a few years back that I heard about. A Jihad Watch reader went into a bookstore and asked if they had my book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam. And the person said, oh, no, we don't carry right-wing books, and we know that Islam is a religion of peace. And besides, the bookseller went on, if we carried something like that, we'd get blown up. And so...
Oh, irony, I love you.
Yes, yes. You have people, I think, that they do have in the back of their minds that if they insult Muslims, if they insult Islam, or if they do what Muslims will take offense at, which is hair trigger and is anything about telling the truth about Islam and jihad, then they think they will be victimized, they will be brutalized, even though at the same time they will affirm that Islam is peaceful. And also, yes, Muslims have very skillfully, the Islamic supremacist Islamic advocacy groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations have very skillfully portrayed Muslims as victims. Yeah. And of course, victimhood carries high privileges in modern Western culture. And they portray themselves as the victims of this backlash that never materializes. And then people say, oh, well, we have to defer to them because we don't want them to be the victims of racist, redneck, bigot, Islamophobic thugs. Yeah. And so we have to bend over backwards to accommodate them. And really, it's all just a tactic to deflect attention away from the reality of jihad terror and honor killings and all the rest. You
know, I do quite a lot of speaking, and the number of times when people will say, what about the Crusades? And I think, well, good Lord, hundreds of years of Islamic persecution, forced conversion, rape, murder, genocide by Islamic armies, Arabic Islamic armies in the heartland and homeland of Christianity, and finally, sometimes brutally, but finally the Christian world says, could you stop doing this and stop desecrating holy places? And in the end, the Muslims win and throw the Christians out. But apparently the Christian world has to say, oh, we're so sorry. Well, we have actually apologized, but the Islamic world says not a word. But once again, the Crusades, the Crusades. Look, we have to have you back because people need to hear this. Keep safe, and as always, thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Michael. Always a pleasure.